I had always been drawn to the allure of old houses, their creaking floorboards and intricate woodwork whispering tales of bygone eras. When I stumbled upon the old manor on Maple Street, I was captivated by its charm and history. The real estate agent's pitch was almost too good to be true, a grand, Victorian home at a price that seemed too reasonable for its size and location. It was as if the house was waiting for me. The first few weeks were idyllic. I reveled in the space, the high ceilings, and the dusty, sunlit corners of my new home. But as the novelty wore off and the days grew shorter, I began to notice peculiar things. It started subtly, an object out of place, a cold draft where none should be. I shrugged off these occurrences as the quirks of an old house settling into new ownership. It wasn't until I encountered the mirror in the upstairs hallway that things took a darker turn. The mirror was an ornate antique, framed in dark wood, and had been covered with a dust cloth when I moved in. One evening, after uncovering it, I was startled to see a figure standing in the reflection behind me, a figure that looked exactly like me but with an unsettling, vacant expression. I turned around quickly, but the hallway was empty. I laughed it off, attributing it to exhaustion or a trick of the light. As days turned into weeks, the reflections became more frequent. I'd catch glimpses of the doppelganger in the corner of my eye, always in mirrors or windows. Its appearances were brief but unnervingly consistent, always mirroring my movements but with a malevolent twist. It began to make me uneasy, but I tried to rationalize it, convincing myself that the house was simply playing tricks on me. One night, while preparing for bed, I noticed the doppelganger's reflection in the full-length mirror in my bedroom. It was standing in the doorway, its gaze fixed on me with a chilling intensity. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I turned to face the mirror directly. The doppelganger's expression remained unchanged, its eyes cold and unfeeling. I reached out to touch the mirror, but my hand met only the cool surface, and the figure disappeared. The next morning, I woke to find the mirror's frame had been etched with strange symbols, as though someone had carved them with great care. I tried to clean the mirror, but the symbols remained, seemingly etched into the glass itself. I decided to investigate the manor's history further, hoping to find some clue about these strange occurrences. The local library was a treasure trove of information about the manor. I discovered that it had been built by a wealthy industrialist in the late 1800s. The record spoke of a tragic event: the industrialist's daughter had mysteriously vanished one stormy night, and her disappearance was never solved. Rumors had swirled about the house being cursed or haunted, but there was little concrete evidence, just whispers and local legends. Determined to find answers, I researched the occult practices of the time, hoping to understand the significance of the symbols on the mirror. I found that they were part of an ancient ritual meant to summon and control a doppelganger, a being created to reflect one's innermost fears and desires. The ritual was said to be dangerous, often resulting in the doppelganger becoming a powerful and malevolent entity. That night, I returned to the mirror with a renewed sense of purpose. I lit candles and arranged them around the mirror, placing salt around the edges as a protective barrier. I recited the incantations from the texts I had found, my voice trembling with both fear and determination. As I spoke the final words, the room grew colder, and the doppelganger's reflection appeared once more, its expression more sinister than ever. The figure stepped out of the mirror, its movements synchronized with mine but with an eerie, deliberate slowness. It began to mimic my actions with a cruel precision, its smile widening as it mirrored my every move. I could feel its presence growing stronger, the room filling with an oppressive darkness. In a desperate bid to end the torment, I confronted the doppelganger directly. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice echoing through the empty house. The doppelganger's voice was a chilling echo of my own, layered with a sense of mocking amusement. "I am your reflection," it said. "I am what you fear most, the darkness you refuse to face." I realized then that the doppelganger was a manifestation of my own unresolved fears and regrets. To banish it, I needed to confront these fears head-on. I forced myself to acknowledge the parts of myself I had been avoiding, failures, regrets, and insecurities. With each admission, the doppelganger's form wavered, its expression shifting from malevolent to sorrowful. The final confrontation was both terrifying and liberating. As I spoke the last of my truths, the doppelganger began to dissolve, its form fading into the mirror's surface. The oppressive darkness lifted, and the cold, malevolent presence was gone. In the aftermath, the mirror's frame was no longer etched with symbols, and the house felt lighter, more serene. The reflections in the mirrors and windows returned to normal, and the sense of dread that had plagued me was lifted. The old manor on Maple Street had finally become a place of peace, a sanctuary where I could live without the haunting echoes of my own double. The experience left me with a profound understanding of the power of self-reflection and the importance of facing one's inner darkness. The manor, once a place of fear and unease, became a reminder of the strength found in confronting our deepest fears and finding peace within ourselves. The first time I saw the doppelganger, it was just a shadow at the edge of my vision, barely perceptible in the gloom of the early evening. I had been working late in my study, the only light coming from the desk lamp and the dying embers in the fireplace. The house was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that presses down on you like a heavy blanket. My computer screen flickered intermittently, casting strange shadows on the walls. I assumed it was fatigue, or maybe the ghostly remnants of my imagination playing tricks on me. But as the days turned into weeks, the glimpses of that shadow grew more frequent and unnerving. It wasn't until one particularly stormy night that I truly understood the gravity of the situation. The rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled like a banshee outside. I was in the middle of revising a manuscript when I noticed it again, a figure standing just outside the perimeter of the lamp's light, barely visible but undeniably there. This time, I forced myself to look directly at it. The figure was an exact replica of me, but something about it was off. Its posture was unnaturally rigid, and its movements were just a fraction of a second behind mine, as if it were mimicking me from a distance. My heart began to race, a cold sweat forming on my brow. I convinced myself it was merely a trick of the light or my own overactive imagination. After all, who would believe that a doppelganger was stalking them? The following morning, I found myself staring at my own reflection in the mirror with a newfound sense of paranoia. Every gesture, every expression felt loaded with the weight of the doppelganger's presence. I began to avoid looking in mirrors altogether, fearing that if I saw it again, it would step out of the glass and into my world. I thought if I ignored it, it would go away, but my attempts to live normally were increasingly futile. Days turned into weeks, and the doppelganger's appearances became more frequent and more blatant. It started showing up not just in shadows but in reflections and even in photographs. I'd see it out of the corner of my eye, always there, always watching. I tried to confront it, but it always vanished before I could get a good look. It was as if it was toying with me, playing a cruel game of hide-and-seek. One night, during an especially vivid storm, I decided to take a photograph of the study in an attempt to prove to myself that it was all in my head. The room was illuminated by the harsh flash of the camera, and when I reviewed the photograph, I was horrified to see it, the doppelganger standing in the doorway, its eyes fixed on the camera with an unsettling gleam. It wasn't just an image, it was as if the figure had been captured at that exact moment, waiting for me to see it. That night, sleep eluded me entirely. The house creaked and groaned under the weight of the storm, and every sound seemed amplified and distorted. I tried to work through it, focusing on my manuscript, but the oppressive atmosphere made it impossible to concentrate. The tapping began again, rhythmic and methodical, coming from the walls and floors, as if someone, or something, was trying to break through. I decided to investigate, convinced that if I could understand the source of the noise, I might be able to stop it. I armed myself with a flashlight and a crowbar, my heart pounding in my chest. The house was dark, illuminated only by the occasional flash of lightning. As I moved through the rooms, the tapping grew louder, more insistent, leading me towards the basement. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, and the air was thick with dust and mildew. The tapping was almost deafening now, coming from behind the walls. I started prying at the paneling, my hands trembling as I worked. After what felt like hours, I uncovered a hidden compartment. Inside was a collection of old photographs, each one depicting someone who looked disturbingly like me, but with a sinister twist. Every person was surrounded by a doppelganger. Among the photographs was a journal, its pages yellowed with age. I opened it with shaking hands, revealing entries that spoke of a family cursed by a doppelganger, a mirror image that grew more malevolent with each generation. The final entry was a frantic scrawl, warning that the doppelganger could only be defeated by confronting it directly, by understanding its origins. I spent the next few days immersed in research, trying to uncover any information about this curse. The doppelganger, according to the journal, was a manifestation of one's darkest self, created when someone failed to confront their inner demons. The more I ignored it, the stronger it grew. Desperate and terrified, I decided to follow the journal's advice. I set up a mirror in the center of the study and sat before it, forcing myself to face the doppelganger directly. As the hours passed, the shadows in the room seemed to grow longer, and the temperature dropped. My reflection, initially normal, began to distort, the doppelganger's malevolent grin growing wider. The moment of truth came when the doppelganger stepped out from the reflection, materializing in front of me. It was like looking into a distorted version of myself, a twisted mirror image. Its eyes were cold, devoid of any warmth, and its smile was a grotesque parody of my own. I could feel its presence pressing down on me, a palpable weight of malice and darkness. I forced myself to speak, my voice quivering as I confronted the doppelganger. "What do you want from me?" I asked, the words barely escaping my lips. The doppelganger's smile widened, and it spoke in a voice that was both mine and not mine, a chilling echo of my own fears and doubts. "I want you to acknowledge what you've been running from," it said. "I am your shadow, your darkness. You cannot escape me." I knew then that the only way to defeat it was to confront my own fears and insecurities. I spent hours talking to the doppelganger, facing the darkest parts of myself that I had been avoiding. It was a harrowing experience, but with each admission, the doppelganger's presence seemed to wane, its form becoming more insubstantial until it finally dissipated, leaving me alone in the quiet of the study. The house was still and silent once more. The photographs and journal were gone, as if they had never existed. I felt a sense of relief but also a profound sadness. I had faced a part of myself that I had been afraid to confront, and in doing so, I had resolved the curse that had haunted me. Though the doppelganger was gone, I knew that the experience had changed me forever. I was no longer the person I had been before, but rather someone who had faced their deepest fears and emerged stronger. The house was quieter now, and as I looked in the mirror, I saw only my reflection, unblemished, untainted by shadows. The house had always been my sanctuary, a place where I could escape the chaos of the outside world. Nestled at the end of a quiet street, it was an old Victorian home with creaking floorboards and an air of forgotten history. I had inherited it from my great-uncle, a man known for his eccentricity and solitude. Despite the house's age, it was well maintained, and I found solace in its familiar rooms and the sense of continuity it provided. The first sign that something was wrong came on a moonlit night in early autumn. I had been working late in my study, engrossed in sorting through a stack of old letters and documents that had belonged to my great-uncle. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and causing the shadows to dance eerily on the walls. I had just finished reading a particularly cryptic letter when I noticed something strange in the mirror across the room. At first, it was just a flicker, a subtle shift in the reflection. I chalked it up to tired eyes or the play of light and shadow. The following nights, however, brought more unsettling experiences. I would see glimpses of a figure in the corners of my vision, always fleeting, always just out of reach. I began to notice subtle changes in the reflections of my mirrors and windows. The figure appeared to be a perfect replica of me, but with a twisted, malevolent edge that sent chills down my spine. It was always watching, always waiting. One evening, as I prepared for bed, I noticed that the reflection in the mirror above the fireplace was different. The figure was there, clear as day, but it wasn't just a shadow. It was a full-bodied, distorted version of myself, its eyes dark and hollow, and its smile a grotesque parody of my own. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination. But as I turned away, I felt an icy draft and heard a soft, whispering voice, almost like a breath on my neck. The nights grew more harrowing. I would wake to find the doppelganger standing at the foot of my bed, its eyes locked on mine with a chilling intensity. Every time I turned on a light, it would disappear, only to reappear in another room, always closer. My sleep was plagued by nightmares where the doppelganger would taunt me, mimicking my every move and mocking my every fear. In my desperation, I sought out old records and documents that might shed light on this haunting presence. I discovered that my great-uncle had been fascinated by the occult and had delved into arcane practices that were said to summon and bind spirits. Among his belongings, I found a journal filled with strange symbols and incantations. One entry, written in a frantic scrawl, described a ritual meant to summon a doppelganger, a mirror image that could supposedly reveal one's deepest fears and hidden desires. I became obsessed with uncovering the truth behind the doppelganger. I performed the ritual described in the journal, hoping to understand what had been unleashed. The house was filled with an oppressive darkness as I recited the incantations, my voice trembling with both fear and determination. The air grew colder, and the doppelganger appeared in the mirror, its eyes gleaming with a malevolent light. The figure spoke in a voice that was both mine and not mine, a chilling echo that seemed to reverberate through my very soul. "You sought to understand me," it said, "but you have only made me stronger." The ritual seemed to strengthen the doppelganger's presence rather than banish it. It began to appear not only in reflections but in every dark corner of the house. Its presence was suffocating, and I could no longer distinguish between my own thoughts and the whispers of the doppelganger. My sanity began to fray as the line between reality and nightmare blurred. In a desperate bid to regain control, I sought out a local historian who specialized in the supernatural. The historian, an elderly woman with a deep understanding of occult lore, listened to my story with a grave expression. She explained that doppelgangers were not mere shadows but manifestations of one's inner darkness, created when someone was unable to confront their own fears and insecurities. According to her, the only way to resolve the haunting was to confront the doppelganger directly, to face the fears and truths it represented. Armed with this knowledge, I returned to the house with a renewed sense of purpose. I prepared a space in the study where the doppelganger had first appeared, placing candles and symbols of protection around me. As I sat before the mirror, I knew that I had to face not just the doppelganger but also the fears that had been festering inside me. I spoke to it, my voice steady despite the fear that gripped me. "What do you want from me?" I asked. The doppelganger's response was a chilling whisper. "I am your reflection, your hidden fears and regrets. You have tried to escape me, but I am a part of you. To banish me, you must confront the darkness within." The encounter was both terrifying and cathartic. I was forced to confront the deepest parts of myself that I had long avoided, fears, regrets, and insecurities that had haunted me for years. Each admission seemed to weaken the doppelganger's form, its figure growing more insubstantial with every truth I faced. By the end of the confrontation, the doppelganger was no more than a wisp of shadow, fading into the mirror's surface. The oppressive darkness lifted, and the house felt lighter, as if a great weight had been removed. The reflections returned to normal, and the eerie presence that had plagued me was gone. I was left with a profound sense of relief and a new understanding of myself. The doppelganger had been a manifestation of my own unresolved fears, and by facing them, I had restored peace to both the house and my own mind. The Victorian home, once a place of dread, became a sanctuary once more, a place where I could reflect on the past and look forward to the future without fear. I've always been a skeptic. When my friends told me ghost stories or recounted bizarre, supernatural experiences, I'd listen politely but dismiss their tales as mere figments of overactive imaginations. That all changed when I moved into the old house on Millbury Lane. It was a charming, albeit slightly run-down, Victorian home that I'd purchased at a bargain price. I told myself the history and character of the place were worth any inconveniences. The first month was relatively uneventful. The creaks of the floorboards and the groans of the settling house were things I'd anticipated. It wasn't until the second month that I began to notice something strange. It started with minor oddities, a misplaced item here, a slight change in the arrangement of furniture there. I chalked these up to my own forgetfulness or the quirks of an old house. Then came the first real encounter. It was a rainy Tuesday night, and I was lounging on the sofa, reading a book. The house was quiet except for the rhythmic patter of rain against the windows. My eyes wandered to the large mirror hanging over the fireplace. For a brief moment, I saw a shadowy figure standing behind me, its shape almost identical to mine. I turned around quickly, but the room was empty. I dismissed it as a trick of the light or my imagination. Over the following weeks, these glimpses became more frequent. I would catch sight of the doppelganger in mirrors, windows, and even reflective surfaces like the polished kitchen counter. It was always fleeting, a quick flash of movement that left me questioning my sanity. Each time, the figure seemed more defined, more deliberate in its actions. It mirrored my own movements with unsettling precision. One particularly eerie night, as I lay in bed reading, I saw the figure clearly in the bedroom mirror. It was standing in the doorway of the room, watching me with a hollow expression. I tried to ignore it, but the figure's gaze was unnervingly direct. The more I tried to focus on my book, the more I felt its presence weighing on me. Eventually, I could no longer concentrate and turned off the light, hoping to escape the haunting reflection. That night, I had a dream, or perhaps it was a nightmare. I was walking through a fog-shrouded forest, and every time I looked over my shoulder, I saw the doppelganger following me. It was standing in the doorway of the room, watching me with a hollow expression. I tried to ignore it, but the figure's gaze was unnervingly direct. The more I tried to focus on my book, the more I felt its presence weighing on me. Eventually, I could no longer concentrate and turned off the light, hoping to escape the haunting reflection. That night, I had a dream, or perhaps it was a nightmare. I was walking through a fog-shrouded forest, and every time I looked over my shoulder, I saw the doppelganger following me. It was always at a distance, never quite close enough to catch, but its presence was relentless. When I woke up, drenched in sweat, I felt an inexplicable sense of dread that lingered throughout the day. The doppelganger's presence grew bolder. It began to interfere with my daily life in more tangible ways. I would find objects moved from their usual places, and on one occasion, I found my kitchen journals and letters that hinted at occult practices, including rituals to summon and control doppelgangers, beings that mirrored one's soul but could not be controlled. As I read through the documents, I found descriptions of similar experiences, people haunted by their own reflections, their lives increasingly disrupted by the presence of their doppelganger. One entry described a ritual intended to banish the doppelganger, but the instructions were incomplete, leaving me with more questions than answers. Determined to rid myself of the doppelganger, I decided to perform the incomplete ritual. I set up a circle of salt in the center of the living room, surrounding it with candles and incense. As I recited the incantations from the journal, I felt a growing sense of unease. The doppelganger appeared in the mirror, its face twisted into an expression of mocking amusement. It seemed to thrive on my fear and desperation. Halfway through the ritual, the lights flickered, and a cold wind blew through the house, extinguishing the candles. The room plunged into darkness, and I heard a low, guttural growl emanating from the doppelganger. It was then that I realized the ritual might have only empowered it further. The doppelganger appeared in the mirror, its face twisted into an expression of mocking amusement. It seemed to thrive on my fear and desperation. Halfway through the ritual, the lights flickered, and a cold wind blew through the house, extinguishing the candles. The room plunged into darkness, and I heard a low, guttural growl emanating from the doppelganger. It was then that I realized the ritual might have only empowered it further. The doppelganger was no longer just a reflection, it was becoming a tangible presence in the house. That night, I heard footsteps echoing through the empty rooms, the sound of someone, or something, moving through the house. I barricaded myself in the bedroom, clutching a flashlight and the incomplete journal. The doppelganger's figure appeared in the bedroom mirror, its eyes glowing with a sinister light. It began to mimic my movements, its gestures growing more aggressive and threatening. In a desperate bid to understand the nature of the doppelganger, I reached out to a local historian who specialized in paranormal phenomena. She explained that doppelgangers were often a manifestation of deep-seated fears and unresolved issues, taking on a life of their own when the person avoided facing these internal struggles. With this new insight, I decided to confront my fears directly. I faced the doppelganger in the mirror, forcing myself to acknowledge the fears and regrets I had been avoiding. The reflection's sinister grin began to fade as I spoke my truth, admitting my insecurities and past mistakes. The more I confronted the doppelganger, the weaker its presence became. As I reached the end of my confession, the doppelganger's form began to dissolve, its eyes losing their malevolent glow. The oppressive atmosphere in the house lifted, and the unsettling disturbances ceased. The house, once again, felt like a home. The doppelganger never returned. The reflections in my mirrors and windows were once again normal, and the sense of unease was gone. I learned a valuable lesson about facing one's inner darkness and the dangers of avoiding one's fears. The Victorian house on Millbury Lane became a place of peace and reflection, a sanctuary where I could live without the haunting presence of my own double.